Once again, welcome everyone. If you're just joining in, please open up the chat. If you haven't introduced yourself yet over there, please let us know where you're joining from today. Welcome to I4CP's Next Practices Weekly. We've got a great guest and a great topic that we'll be getting to here in just a moment. But for those of you that are new, we are I4CP, the Institute for Corporate Productivity. We're a human capital research firm. We discover the people practices that drive high performance to help our member companies see what's coming at them in these sort of crazy times. And we define high performance with four fairly standard business metrics: revenue growth, profitability, market share, and customer satisfaction. We do this through our major research studies. We like to tease out what that top quartile of companies, the top 25%, the high performers, what they're truly doing differently in all of their human capital practices. We are a member-based community. You see here some of the logos of some of the organizations represented in I4CP membership out of the several hundred that we have in the community. They really range from very large organizations like Microsoft, Amazon, 3M, Visa, Accenture, and others to much smaller organizations. Those would say only 1, 2, 3,000 employees each. We've got a growing cohort of unicorn startup companies. We've got regional banks, regional healthcare and hospital systems, you name it. Really spans across all industry verticals. So if you're with us on the call today and with a member organization, special welcome to you. Always great to have members with us on the line. If you're not with a member company but would like to learn more about what that entails, what it involves, what the benefits are, just reach out to anyone at I4CP or go ahead and visit us on the web at i4cp.com. My name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP, and most weeks I have the pleasure of co-hosting our Next Practices Weekly series. This week I'm joined by Mark Walker, our VP of Member Services. Good morning, Mark. Good to have you with us.
Good to see you, Tom. Thanks for having me. I was nervous for a moment that I'm wearing the same shirt as I am in the picture. And I was like, wow, that's inconsistent in terms of the craziness that Mark only has one outfit to wear in public.
Yeah. Nice catch. It's good to have you with us. You'll be facilitating the conversation with our special guest today, who I know you know well, and we'll bring him on in just a moment. But before that, a couple of other quick announcements and reminders. This is Next Practices Weekly. You see there on the right some of the upcoming sessions that we'll have. We've got Mark joining us again with two other colleagues, Amber Burton and Mimi Turner, to discuss strategic HR leadership during uncertain times, which we're certainly living through now. That'll be next week on June 5th. Then on June 12th, we've got Samantha Dubridge, Vice President of HR at HPE. And then looking further out, you see we've got a group of folks focused on talent development at Cox Enterprises joining us on July 10th. Couple of other reminders, some things that we have released recently. As we said, these are very uncertain times, and we've pulled together a batch of resources, 13 to be exact, to help you lead more strongly and more agilely in these uncertain times in 2025. You see the list there of what I4CP members have access to. You can learn more about this, the QR code there in the bottom left, or the link that will be put in the chat. In addition, I4CP members have access to a new AI tool that we've named ARI. You can see there the color coding on the left of the logo, HR in AI. This is a tool, so beyond just regular search of all of our resources of our website, which of course we still have a basic search functionality, ARI is a large language model driven chat interface, much like ChatGPT or Gemini, but it's one that's been trained up on all of I4CP's research, all of our case studies, infographics, all of our material that members have access to. So it really is a great partner at your side for those difficult HR questions. I think more and more people are starting to use ARI, more so than the site-wide search. Both have their place, of course. You see some of the things that you can learn using ARI, lessons learned from across our membership community. You can seek advice on specific challenges that you might be facing in HR and more. So you can learn more about it. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
One other thing I'd just call out on ARI, the unique ability, we have an expert network where members post questions to each other and they share models, ideas, case studies of their own that they're implementing in their work streams. And ARI is able to surface from those community conversations details in combination with our research tools, et cetera.
Right.
So it's really tapping into the community aspect in addition to all of the other things that obviously I4CP does so well.
Yeah, that's a great call out. That community aspect has grown tremendously in, say, the last 7 to 10 years. I've been with the company 7 years now, and when I first joined, that expert network didn't have a whole lot of activity. But since then, it's grown quite a lot, and it provides a tremendous value. And the fact that we've included that content in the training of ARI is one of its strongest features. So thank you for pointing that out. As Zeta has already put in the chat, members can learn more about it out at our website, and the QR code on the screen gets you there as well. With that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Mark, to introduce today's special guest and facilitate the conversation.
Thanks again, Tom. I have been fortunate, in my role as head of member services to meet, a variety of people across our network and beyond. And about a year and a half ago, I took over responsibility for being the executive sponsor for our Total Rewards Board. And that got me in touch with Pete. And it was a sincere pleasure to, just start some conversation about various things in his background, his expertise in total rewards. And we're going to, take time today, not only to hear about that, but to put it in context of 2025. So Pete, welcome. Thanks for being a part of today's experience.
Thanks, Mark. It's really great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're glad to have you, and I think in the way that you approach the world that I've seen, it's you're a humble guy that has a lot to offer. So maybe we start with just a little bit of a sketch of your background. You obviously have some professional services. You've got global manufacturing in Owens Corning, as well as Microsoft. Maybe you give us a 30,000-foot view of your career trajectory.
Sure. Yeah, just a shout out. I noticed in the chat as if a bunch of people were joining, some of my former colleagues that I saw are out there. So hi, everybody, and it's great to be here today. In terms of my background, just really quickly, I started out at Mercer I graduated from college, actually. I just went to my 35th college reunion this weekend, which was a lot of fun. It was fun to think about those days. But I started Mercer. My focus was executive compensation, and I worked after that at a bank and Owens Corning in Toledo, Ohio. And then after then, I went to during that time I went to business school at night at University of Michigan, and then when I moved to Microsoft in 2000, I'd been there for about 25 years almost. And I just updated my LinkedIn today because I guess I hadn't updated, but I left Microsoft back in October for those of you who didn't know. So I mean, that's kind of a high level sketch of my background. The whole time at Microsoft, I was in the compensation and benefits group with a focus on compensation for broad-based markets, including international comp and ben, sales compensation, executive compensation, and other areas, and work closely with colleagues all over that great company for many years.
Yeah, I imagine the sets of conversations you have been involved with, as well as the mix of leaders, especially as we have featured Microsoft in so many ways, especially on the culture side with Satya's, ownership of culture being, number one. I imagine you're going to unpack a little bit of that today. Before we go too much further, Pete, I always like thinking you're more than just your work background. And I'd love to ask you a simple question, because I know you love music. What's the longest travel trip you've made to go see a band live?
Oh dear. Yeah, I go to about one show a month, or try to at least, live. And I think the longest, I picked that song if you were here for the intros, a band called the Beths that I went to Austin, Texas to go see a couple of years ago. I think that's the farthest I've traveled.
Okay, and for those of you who don't know the Beths, you're trying to give us a wider berth of exposure to the music.
That's right.
I think.
Yeah, I prefer kind of smaller shows if I can. That's a band from it's like an indie rock band from New Zealand. Sorry.
Perfect. Well, again, I think those are the interesting things that say, as we look at our culture research, obviously, there's a lot to do in human capital, and there's a lot that leaders do to engage and create clarity. But trust also is a part of the productivity quotient. And as we think about getting to know people and that connection, that's certainly something that is great to bring out. So, maybe we did take a step into the Microsoft experience and talk a little bit about your changes that you saw around compensation and potentially the strategy over the last decade, because I'm sure that there are some things when you look back, COVID and the emphasis on empathy, and productivity. There's some things that likely bubble to the top of that experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at Microsoft, for most of my time there, and I think everybody who works there would agree that the employee experience is really paramount. It's something that is a big part of our culture, obviously, and it's a focus area that is tremendously important. And total rewards is a big, big part of that. So how people feel about their pay, how people feel about their benefits and their overall employee experience, all that stuff that's included into the total rewards umbrella. But of course, is a huge part of the HR functions efforts to make sure that that's a cohesive experience. So I think that to me, the big things were many changes about performance management, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Microsoft was one of the companies, one of the first companies, I think, to go with no ratings, which was a huge cultural change for us, and it was a big, big part of the transition. It just happened to be something we were working on actually at the time when Steve Ballmer and Satya transitioned the CEO role to Satya Nadella. And I know that that's evolved, that's continuing to evolve. It's not something that stays static, but we have made many, many changes over the 25 years I was there to really try to dial that in. And it's such a huge part of the overall employee experience. But the other piece is just in general, I think I would call out a focus on pay equity is something that we spent a lot of time on as well. In addition to market competitiveness, obviously, as a sort of a paramount thing in the compensation world. And then on the benefit side, so many changes. I mean, really, benefits, I think, were something that we were really proud of at Microsoft, the broadness of the depth of the benefits, the level of support that employees were given in the US, but also outside the US. Outside the US, we spent a lot of time trying to come up with ways that were, cost efficient ways to make sure that we are market competitive, as well as consistent to the degree that we could be. As you all know, and we could talk about this all day, but as you know, every country has statutory benefits that are potentially a little bit different rules and laws that you have to that apply to every country in different situations. But at Microsoft, we really made an effort to try and be globally consistent, at least in some core ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to dig into several of those, I think, in a deeper level. But before we get there, Tom, I think we want to go to the poll question, and we'd love to, I think, fast forward, I think, all of your participation in this. We'd love to know, which one of the following is your organization's current top priority for your company's total rewards portfolio. Take a look at this, in terms of whether it's talent architecture, whether it's working on personalization of rewards, non-monetary rewards. Maybe you don't know, it says, or another, and we'll ask you to put that in the chat. It says, but we'd love to get some, feedback from this group in terms of where's the top priority. Pete, while people are filling this out, what's your, top one or two, kind of choices here that you'd anticipate, several hundred organizations ranking to the top?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, actually, as I was talking here, I was thinking, we don't have on here like pay increases or things like that. I mean, obviously, just the overall cost portfolio is something that in total rewards you're thinking of all the time. The top one there, talent architecture, is also one that I find to be really interesting, and I imagine we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think people would be surprised. We talk about this a lot in our Total Rewards board at I4CP, is how important talent architecture is to compensation and specifically and all of HR, but why is it something that Total Rewards people are focused on? Why isn't this something that the talent organization or the organizational development function is focused on? And they are, but it's such an important piece of underlying pay equity, underlying market competitiveness, that it seems to be a top area of concern for Total Rewards leaders as well.
Yeah.
And I
So
think the other thing, Mark, is I would like to point out, I'm no longer at Microsoft, so I'm looking at some of the questions that people have around what did Microsoft do about this or that, and I'm happy to talk about some of that at a pretty high level, but I'm not here in a capacity representing Microsoft, so I just want to be clear on that.
Totally good, and I think everybody understands, that connection, and appreciate you. Yeah, I think setting the record straight, so to speak. I think that's a good foundation for us. When I look at this at a big picture, I think it's fascinating that it's almost all across the board. You've got 24% on performance management. You've got 22% on benefits. You have another actually grouping that on benefits. Let's see. No, the one that I was just jumping onto was I don't know. And while I'll tongue in cheek this a moment, is there's a part of, I think, our inquiry with the Total Rewards board into what's the extent at which you discuss your top priorities across your key functions. And I know that the majority of the people on this call may not be from Total Rewards, and the extent to which we have created clarity. Tom, when we step back to our priorities and predictions and we look at the alignment of many of these priorities, there can be some overlap and some places where they're not even close to working on the same types of areas, and that opportunity for transparency may exist in a lot of this. So, Pete, when you look at the data, is there something that kind of jumps out to you, similar to what I had shared?
Yeah, I mean, given the topic, we're talking about uncertain times, and people are, I guess, uncertain of the future is probably a fair way to describe the current environment in terms of business environment. It's not surprising to me that performance management slash skilling, I know that's a broad category, and as well as benefits competitiveness are the top ones, because when I hear performance management, I think we either are getting tighter, thinking about how we're going to shrink our workforce, how do we focus on performance, or how do we get the most out of the people that we have without growing headcount. I think that's a common focus area for a lot of companies. And when it comes to benefits, benefit costs are going up pretty fast, maybe faster than inflation in some cases. So how do we control those costs in an environment where we do have uncertainty and we really want to manage those costs without significantly changing the employee experience?
Yeah. That one, I'd almost the word that pops to mind is Ozempic, and it feels like a taboo word in many Total Rewards people's vocabulary, simply because of the cost associated with that one drug. But ultimately, I found some really interesting questions that get put into the chat, and one of them I'd like to just call out maybe at the beginning is with the top item around talent architecture. And Christopher asks, can you look at talent architecture without digital transformation and AI at the same time? Pete, maybe you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I don't really, to be honest, I think AI and digital transformation go together, because people are thinking about, hey, if I'm making an investment in whether it's, a tool or a process, how do I not consider AI as part of that to make things go more smoothly? For example, I think, and that can come in just so many forms, and I'm sure I can't do a good job of wrapping in all the ways it would behoove organizations to make sure that they're really leveraging the AI tools that they can, to make sure that their talent architecture processes are are good. But for me, like, when I think of AI and talent architecture, I think of, a big heavy part of the work of talent architecture is assessing the existence of roles that exist in the organization and at what level, if you will, or what job grade they are, and are they grouped together from a market perspective and in the right way. So we spend a lot of time at Microsoft trying to figure out, things like, is this job a software engineering job, or is this job a data analytics role, or is this job, a customer success role? And sometimes within the organization, roles will without a doubt evolve over time, and people will want to add skills to those roles which they need to do. And so there's just always that natural tension within an organization about, hey, this job is as important as this job, or more important, should be paid the same, should be paid more, should be paid less. Those things I think AI has a role in helping figure that out, just because the volume of information and the volume of inputs to make those assessments in a fair and consistent way are often you have to hire, external firms just to do that type of analytics. And I think they'll leverage machine learning and AI and other things to help them get it to a point where it can then be assessed and sort of judged, I guess, finally by a human.
I coming from Hay Group and you from Mercer, I think the job evaluation people are going, oh my God, AI is going to run us over. The other piece that I wonder in here when I saw this question was something about how does role change because of AI in, whether it's a product management role, whether it is a sales role, et cetera, and now they're augmented by AI, how much does it need to be taken into account? And is that a part of the impact to the comp strategy overall? There's a complexity to this. I think Annalee points out, there's likely hooks in your comp strategy that are connected to career frameworks, because JE, job evaluation is not just for comp. It is produces fruits for the rest of the organization. Maybe you want to talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, the thing that I don't know. I know that we've been talking for years about skills, right? Skills, and should we pay for skill? We always have this debate usually with our talent partners around, hey, we should be paying for skills, and comp people are like, well, we pay for the job. We pay because we can't benchmark a skill. But, maybe, and I'm just speculating here, maybe that we're at the point in time I keep hearing, that jobs, to your point, Mark, there are specific aspects of a job, which, let's call it a skill or an activity that requires a skill, that can be automated better using AI or leveraged better. So how does that piece of the job change? And do we need to start looking at individuals or people more as individuals with skills versus jobs? I don't know. I think that right now we're still stuck in a world where, because we have to measure things like, rightly so, like pay equity, and sort of survey the organization to think about our job pyramid and to think about how many people are doing X role, X or Y. It's difficult to move into that world of, we just have a compendium or whatever of people with different skills that each may have a different value. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I remember last year we were sitting with the Total Rewards board and we were talking about skill strategy and the overlap. And the simple question was, to what extent are we thinking about paying for skills? And most folks, I think, were like, nope, 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 nope. We're not there yet. Was almost the stop sign. And I thought, how do we need to bridge that gap if the momentum is really going in that direction?
Let me jump in on this, because I've done a lot of work on our workforce readiness studies back in 2021, and then more recently with Catherine Brecken on our team, our most recent workforce readiness study. And yeah, from all the interviews I've done, certainly the comp side of the focus on becoming a skills-based organization is sort of lagging behind some of the other areas where skills come into play more readily. Learning and development, talent acquisition, focusing on skills more than degrees, that sort of thing. Those are usually the low-hanging fruit changes you see as companies focus on skills. Comp is something that companies are looking at, and maybe in very targeted ways, like you were saying, Pete. Maybe the time has come to start, looking at that. I wanted to note that we are undertaking now a major new study on exactly this, becoming a skills-based organization. I hope to derive out of that a maturity model, and also conduct some interviews to see where some of the leading companies are on this journey, because it is a multi-year journey for companies that go down this road. So hopefully we can check back here at Next Practices Weekly. Maybe in 3 or 4 months, we'll have some fresh data on this topic.
It's a great ad, Tom. I think Pete and I, we just led a Total Rewards board meeting, and I'll put a little plug in. It was a unique environment for us to have one of the Total Rewards leaders from a global, 100,000 plus organization bring their talent management leader to that party. And they were talking very specifically about their skills incentives and the extent to which, while they're not paying at the skill level, they're thinking about things like long-term incentives as a part of the package to help, retain that talent longer term. And so, they're taking, I would say, mid steps to, create the right intersection of total rewards and talent strategy, which really should be together. But ultimately, you have that component of it's easier to say and harder to do. Pete, anything that would jump out of that conversation that you'd say was super interesting around the skills incentive side?
I think, as I'm, it's not necessarily that conversation, Mark, but I know I did want to point, these hot topics here, these are things that we talk about at our Total Reward. These are kind of the things on the agenda for the year of our Total Rewards leaderboard. And that alignment with business objectives, I think, also is a little bit related to this topic. When we talk about an uncertain environment, I think, one fallback position we have as comp professionals is always, how do we make sure we build in alignment to the reward structure, like the bonus plan or the long-term incentive plan, with our actual business objectives? Which are the most important business objectives? Which are the things that are really going to be the metrics that drive performance overall? And it's always a challenge, because that you tend to work with the business, and there'll be, everyone has every part of the business has a different metric that they'd like you to measure and reward for, because they feel it's the most important. But you always have this tension between, you can't have 12 metrics in your incentive plan, because then nobody's focused on the right thing, or you have to have a million different incentive plans for everybody in the organization, which is a little bit like that personalization of rewards debate that we have as well. But I think, for the other thing that comes up, and I think in a surprisingly frequent manner, is this topic about non-monetary rewards as well. And by non-monetary rewards, people typically mean recognition programs. How do we recognize employees in ways that are outside of our traditional performance management compensation program, in order to support not just good work and good performance, but the cultural behaviors that we want to see in the organization? And I don't know that anyone's really cracked the code on this as well, but it's definitely a topic, and it's a topic that a lot of companies don't have a lot of focus in this area, because these other topics just take such a higher priority, because there's such a either higher cost or far more, they're seen as far more urgent.
It's super interesting. I remember one of the early conversations that I think started the non-monetary rewards piece for me was a Total Rewards leader said, we're experiencing an entitlement culture where we have paid for talent to come in from the external sources, likely digital talent, where it's like we're competing with Microsoft and we want to get those folks. We have to pay a little bit higher wage, and now they're expecting kind of that continual stair step, and the cost parameters that impact an organization at scale are scary. And obviously the cultural implication that we're going to continue to do that is also something that you have to like marry the talent strategy, comp strategy piece together to actually map that out. And it was striking to me to step back and go, Pete, we got to, dig into what are organizations doing on the non-monetary side, and even to the extent, how are they communicating that on a regular basis? If you remember, last fall, one of Target hosted our in-person board meeting, and they talked about just the communication strategy of their rewards. And I remember people going, furiously taking notes, saying, "How do we do this better? How do we think about meeting people where they're at and potentially simplifying the message?" Yeah, you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, you mean the communication piece, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. I mean, I think from a total rewards perspective, the holy grail is, you want to make sure you're spending all this money on pay and benefits, right? You want to make sure people understand and appreciate what it is that they're getting, because some of the things that they get, specifically at a company like Microsoft, got long-term incentives that, like stock or restricted stock units that vest over time. You've got benefit packages that you may not take advantage of in a certain year, but have a certain value. And you have, over other aspects of the employment deal that you want to certainly either put a dollar amount on to kind of help people understand that they have a value, or at least make them aware of. And traditionally, you call this the total rewards statement. Used to be like a piece of paper that would say, here's your base pay and here's your bonus opportunity. Many companies, I think most companies now have, certainly moved off the paper statement, that one time a year thing, to something that's more dynamic and more accessible to employees, that puts a value on that. But it's also, I think that conversation at Target, pointed out something, that it's still something that you have to educate managers on as well as employees, because conversations around, around the water cooler, or if you're getting to a situation where you're entertaining an offer from another company, you want to make sure that people really understand what the deal is, or what we call the deal at Microsoft. So meaning everything that you get from Microsoft and all the forms that you value, that's your deal. Whether that's, flexibility, but you can't put really a dollar amount on, like how many days I have to be in the office, or, do I get free sodas or coffee or whatever? Like, you don't put a dollar amount necessarily on your total reward statement, but it's something that people think about and value, and their potential career progression. These are all things that I think in the future will hopefully get better and better at representing what that employee value proposition is in a total reward statement, or something of that kind.
Pete, when you think about that, I guess, and I love the leader point in particular, I would say capable are most leaders at doing that?
How capable? Yeah, that's a great question. I think we struggle with that. I mean, I think we put a lot on managers, a lot of expectations on managers to be able to do that. And I think that they would say that they as leaders and managers have to do a lot of work to prepare, because not just understanding the potential realm of questions that they're going to get, but every employee looks at this thing from a different perspective. But it truly is like, manager capability is something that, we continue to have to invest in all the time. I think it's a best practice to, when you're rolling something out that's new, like whether it's a statement or a new reward program, to treat that group of people separate from employees, so separate them out as leaders and managers, to help them understand what their role is in the communication, or just as a supporting role in case they get questions, to make them feel like they're involved in the process, or at least having a heads up and understanding what's coming down the pike.
Yeah. So there was a comment in here from Robert that I think is an interesting one on the non-monetary. That is, do employees value them? And typically leaders value stuff differently than what the employee base may. Uh, are there ways that you found effective to determine value at the employee level?
No, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is, that question brings to mind a lot of benefit programs, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that, it's such a experience-based thing. I mean, if somebody had let's say a child with, a needs at birth that needed special medical attention, and they received that medical attention that would have, cost millions of dollars, had they not had the support from the great insurance benefits that Microsoft had. I mean, you never saw such grateful emails in my life than like the emails that would come to our benefits team. And we would always laugh in the comp team because we were like, we don't really get thank you notes. Like, people don't like thank you for it. But people love their benefits, especially when they need them, right?
Yeah.
That's, I guess, gets to another a point I think we'll talk about a little bit later, is how do you measure effectiveness of these programs, and how do you gauge, what's important to people at different phases? And there's all these models, right? Like, there's the but I forget what you call them in the marketing speak. Like, you got these personas. You're trying to target your different benefit packages towards different personas. That's one way to think about it. But it's literally like, a different phase of, depending on what phase of life, what country you're in, what your background is, you're going to value things at a different time. And I think when I think about it from that point about managers and leaders, it's sort of like at the management level, it's knowing your employees, knowing, what they value and what they value most, so that you can explain to them, hey, this is how Microsoft or whatever company can meet those needs and help you reach your full potential.
I think it's a great call out, in terms of, obviously that connection to the personalization of rewards, side, because you just are, how do we, mechanize, some of that, really tough. And in fact, I remember in March we had that, was at least the start of the conversation specifically around, personas, the extent to which we can, think about, the phases of life, and people who are early
Yeah.
career versus later on in life, and they want more of the things that lean towards, retirement benefits, et cetera. So Tom's doing a good job of, I think, pushing us along, which I appreciate highly, Tom, because I think Pete and I can talk all day about a variety of things. But we teed up a series of questions that I'd love, Pete, obviously, you to chime in on and, help us, I think, absorb what's the, strategic thought process, as well as, what your experience tells us. So, do we have a skills first talent architecture that can flex with AI driven change?
Yeah, I think for this one, to when we were talking about this presentation or this discussion, we kind of said, well, what are some questions that, as a practitioner, whether you're in total rewards or you're in HR, that you could ask yourself to say, hey, over the next 24 months in this dynamic environment, what is something I can proactively think about to get myself ready for whatever it is, whatever environment I think I'm in. And, this one I think it's not an easy question. I certainly don't know if I would be able to answer this without like a massive project, but this idea of, okay, we've got AI coming, and they're in here, and it's going to continue to evolve. The changes that come with that. We talked a little bit about this earlier, the skills first talent architecture. So how is it that we can think about what is it that we need to do as an organization to think about what are the critical skills that we need in our organization? Do we have them? And how can we grow them over the next 24 months? Is there a way for managers to see, real time or what the supply or demand is of these different types of skills that are in place in our organization over the next 24 months, and how can we leverage AI to do that? I know, and there's a whole bunch of different ways you can talk about that, but I mean, it's all generative AI is already automating tasks for people. People are creating agents, etc. Traditional job descriptions may go stale faster. Are you ready for that? Like, how can you get ready for that?
I would underscore, the skills may go stale faster is a really interesting question, and our ability to think about, kind of the utility of what are the criticality that obviously the human AI, balance brings forward. It's a tough equation, and Tom and I think we're just talking about how organizations can boil the ocean too much and get stuck before you need to just make some core movements probably in pockets of the organization first, which again, easier said than done, but really a tight focus. Question two, I think you mentioned healthcare costs obviously going up. What is our risk managed plan for those rising healthcare costs?
Yeah, and I think the other thing there is, no one really likes to talk about severance costs, but like severance, I feel like it's worth calling out. I mean, employees, you hired your employees, they deserve to be treated fairly and with compassion if you do have to make hard decisions and exit people. So I think looking at your severance policies and making sure that they are, I don't want to say competitive, but like, because that's kind of a weird statement to apply to severance, but competitive is competitive, fair, and meeting with your intentions as of what you want their experience to be. They have to exit company. You don't want people feeling like, gosh, I worked here and I got treated like in a negative light if they left. One thing that we did at Microsoft, I know, was we had to really look hard at this. How do we feel about what kind of statements can we make about our severance plan can they be in a kind of a globally consistent way, because there are rules around separating employees that differ dramatically around the world. Europe, just as a general rule, is super generous, I guess, when it comes to severance, versus the United States kind of on the other end of that spectrum. You don't really have to do anything if you don't want to, other than WARN Act and things like that. So it does come down to what do you want to do, and what's kind of a fair thing to do. And we talked a little bit about rising benefit costs. What's your game plan for the next 24 months around cost sharing, for example, and get down even to those levels that you mentioned around certain weight management drugs, which could benefit and benefit the employee, but also have a positive impact on hopefully long-term costs for your organization. If people are healthier over time, that's going to have hopefully lower your costs over time as well.
Interesting balance, and it tells me that we've got to have deep expertise in the understanding of how they all interrelate. But I think your comment around culture matters in what we're trying to say about whether it's a RIF or a reduction in cost, or cost sharing around healthcare benefits. Those types of things are significant to the employee, and trying to figure out how to balance that is a important overlap that we've got to make a significant effort on, and obviously to simplify for the leader. Why don't we go to the last one, which is more around our reward investments, both cash and non-cash. How do we think about tying them directly to measurable business outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that especially your comp people, your sales comp teams, your exec comp teams. I mean, these are a big part of the annual or cycle of what are the metrics that you want to focus on. Are you profit driven? Are you growth driven? Are you thinking about a specific type of profit or growth metric that has the ability to both be understood by whoever it's targeting, and impacted, or at least make him feel like this makes sense. The company, companies have such different thoughts on this. It's actually amazing to me. Like when I did a lot of mergers and acquisitions over my time at Microsoft and saw a lot of different bonus plan designs. And it's kind of incredible to me to see some companies just fully buy into this bonus plan is the reason we're successful. Like this thing is dialed in, versus other companies are just kind of like it's kind of on autopilot. They haven't changed it in a while, and it kind of feels more like an entitlement or something that would just pay out. And if it doesn't pay out, people would be confused. So it's worth thinking about what role do you want your incentives to play. Especially and your communication strategy around how it's tied to measurable business outcomes. And it's kind of a heavy lift to communicate these things too. So it's not an easy thing to do, especially when things don't go the way you want them to go. Then you find yourself explaining them in tougher times.
Yeah, well, or over explaining and get yourself into more trouble, which is kind of tough. I find that topic obviously of one tying it to measurable outcomes seems like a great headline. There's also a fair amount of organizations inside incentives that are talking about what's the balance of performance outcomes for a leader versus almost the behavioral, the how they get there. When in your experience at Microsoft, was there a balance inside that incentive in terms of how they, obviously try to promote specific either behavior or performance overall?
Well, we had a lot of we had actually more of a focus on, I guess, targeted business outcomes for different roles. So sales force was certainly something where we really focused on targeted business outcomes than other roles. We had so many software engineers, for example, where we didn't really want them thinking about business ROI so much, and really more focused on their performance. So leveraging the performance management system to tie that more to the bonus outcome versus some business metric. But that's a whole different discussion.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think it adds some indeed complexity. It also makes me think in your at Microsoft when you were there, did Total Rewards have a dotted line to performance management? Did they own performance management? What was the relationship there?
Well, performance management means many things to many people, but when I say performance management, I mean things like the ratings, whether you have a rating or not, and how your annual assessment program drives things like your base pay increase, your bonus payout, et cetera. And Total Rewards, own that whole process for sure. But we worked really closely with our partners in other functions, especially communications, especially our talent management. But when it came to things like developing the tool, figuring out how it all is going to work, I mean, we were the owners of that. We had a couple people focused on that. That was all they did, pretty much.
Yeah, and from the Total Rewards board standpoint, that's not always the case, right?
That's true. It's very much not the case. I think you find a lot of times comp is the delivery mechanism, but not the design. So if you really think about it, one of those where that gets challenging is if someone says, "Hey, there's no ratings, we're going to get rid of ratings." Well, then the comp team has to go figure out, well, what does that mean? How do we decide, or how do we help managers decide, how to deliver rewards in that environment? So yeah, that's right. I think it's about 50-50 maybe, Mark, or maybe 60% not owned by the comp or Total Rewards team.
I definitely think it leans more towards they don't own them.
Yeah. I work closely with our Chief Learning and Talent Officer board, and we have about 50 members of that board, the majority of which are broader Chief Talent Officers. So they typically own learning, but they own a lot more than that, and many of them own performance management, along with other areas of talent as well.
Yeah, that tracks.
It definitely tracks with the what we're experiencing on the Total Rewards board, and I think there is a desire, almost to Pete's point around what do you do about this to bring them closer, if it's not, because I think that lack of accountability creates some I think significant challenge. So great point. I'm sure we'll have more discussion about that. Pete, I think obviously we've got limited time left on the call, and I'd love to just get some strategic considerations. We're in some significantly uncertain times, and it would be great to understand from your perspective, how do we stay aligned? How do we not go off track with so many different things happening, from tariffs, from just again, a variety of uncertainty economically, that would help leaders kind of move forward.
Yeah, no, I think there's this always this dynamic in my mind. There's this need for stability in to some degree for our employees. For these programs are not easy to change. Think about like a performance management program or a benefits program in general. They once they get set up, they kind of roll, and yes, you can make tweaks, but they're difficult to change. And I think it's really important to remember we're in a moment that's not going to last forever. So you don't want to whipsaw too much and say, oh, this is new world now. We're not going to have benefits anymore or something like that. Like we're going to cut.
Sure.
We're going to do something dramatically different, unless that really aligns to short and long term goals for you and your organization. I think that this first point here about stakeholder management, I mean, think about who your audiences are. You've got employees, you've got your C-suite, you've got your board, you've got your people managers, external investors. These are all different stakeholders that are impacted one way or another, believe it or not, by the total reward strategy of your organization. But I think making sure that you've got a clear line of sight between that narrative of, hey, here's how this pay or benefit dollar supports the KPI, whether that's but it matters how you explain it to different organizations and stakeholders, and you can do that by developing story dashboards and reports that kind of continuously feed back to those different audiences to help them understand what it is that you're trying to say to them when it comes to the story you're trying to tell with your total reward strategy. That second base point is that continuous sensing with leader dashboard. So I think we talked about this in the Total Rewards leaderboard, and we have a strong partnership. Those of you who have people analytics organizations within your teams, making sure that you're tied to the hip with them when it comes to, hey, what are the things that we can measure from an employee sensing perspective, as well as other leading indicators that are, whether they're financial metrics or metrics that come out of your people data systems to like transfers or people leaving the organization, people coming into the organization, how much you're paying them, et cetera, to make sure that you've got a good eye on that stuff. And the more real time, the better. And that last one's just scenario based. It's like thinking about this is the bread and butter of things that you have to do as a total rewards comp person, is hey, what are we going to do with if X happens or Y happens or Z happens when it comes to different scenarios for cost, because ultimately it's a conversation with your leaders, your CFO, about what can we actually do within the confines of our budget.
I think it's a super interesting set of reminders. The one thing that I also was interested to raise, from you, Pete, is this is one of the, I would say, unique roles within HR that has a direct line to the board of directors. And, obviously the chief HR officer does, but as the top person, are connected with a board committee and a regular, I would say, conversation with the CEO that is, I feel, pretty unique. Can you say a little bit more about kind of how that affects your strategy and thinking about kind of alignment with the business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my time at Microsoft, I wasn't tacked into the board myself, but I know
Sure.
my boss, Kristen, she was at board meetings, giving updates around all kinds of things, total rewards. It's sort of like clearly the thing that the board is probably most concerned about is how are we paying the executives, and how is that organization, from a succession planning, how's it tying to that? So you have that compensation committee that's constantly asking those types of questions, but they're also increasingly involved in kind of all aspects of total rewards, not as a decision-making body, but making sure that they're informed around things like pay equity. They want to be aware of any risks. We spend a lot of time looking at, okay, do our plans have any kind of risk involved in them? And what would that look like? And define that broadly. Those are the things that I think are, that the board really, really cares about.
Yeah, I very much think so. And so maybe one last question. When you're thinking about top characteristics of people you hire for total rewards, what does that look like?
I think curiosity. I think being able to be flexible, obviously, and learn, because this is certainly now this environment that we're in. I mean, having the basic skills that help in a total rewards function, whether that's comp or benefits, are really important. But you want to make sure that that person is ready for growth and change in the environment that we're in today.
I sit here and think about the complexity of knowing the comp side, and then having that on top of it, knowing how talent mobility from a strategy works. Likely you got to be able to ask those questions to actually see how what you're trying to put in place from a TR standpoint fits. So it's a great comment. Very, very good. Tom, what else?
Well, very good. I want to thank you both. This has been a great conversation. So thank you, Mark. And thank you, Pete. Great insights shared today. Total rewards is something that we don't hit on maybe as often as we should here at Next Practices Weekly, but you've given us a nice broad perspective on it in the conversation today. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tom.
everybody.
Thank you, Pete. You're awesome. You got tons of depth for us to learn from.
Yeah. Lastly, I'll just note for those of you that have a certification with either HRCI or SHRM, as always, Next Practices Weekly events are available for a recertification credit hour. So Zeta put the codes for that. You can copy and paste from the chat or just jot them down, the ones you see here on the screen. With that, I'll close us out. Thank you again, Pete and Mark. Thank you, Zeta and Matt, for your support behind the scenes. And everyone, I want to wish you a great rest of your day, rest of your week, and weekend coming up. And we'll see you again next week here on Next Practices Weekly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Pete.
Bye.